welcome to 5-5 Day 1 Introduction to Imaginary Numbers. So today we are going to talk about what an imaginary number is and why do we use it, and then how do we solve an equation with imaginary solutions. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is an imaginary number. An imaginary number is the square root of a negative number. So you'll notice before we talked about the square root of, say, 64 would be 8. But now we're dealing with the square root of a negative number. So the square root of a negative 1 is referred to as I. This is just helping us so that we can write the square roots a little bit nicer. You'll see that coming up here. And negative 1 is I squared, because if you square the square root of negative 1, you'll get I squared. It is written in the form bi, where b is a real number and I is the imaginary number. So it is also used to write the square root of any negative number. That's kind of like I was talking about before. So this first problem here says express each number in terms of I. So we have 3 times the square root of negative 16. So like I talked about earlier, we can't do this because you can't take the square root of a negative number. It'll come up with an error on your calculator. But now that we know that the square root of negative 1 is something called I, now we can write the square root of negative 16 as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. So we know that the square root of negative 1 is I, and we know that the square root of 16 is 4. So now don't forget we multiplied by that 3 out in front. So now we have 3 times I times 4, which is the same thing as 12I. Don't forget that plus or minus because we square rooted that 16. So now we have the opposite of the square root of 75, negative 75. So we have negative 75. Square root that, we'll start with that and then we'll add the negative out in front later. So the square root of negative 75, we can break it down as negative 1 times the square root of 75. Now 75 isn't a perfect square, but we can break it down into a number that is a perfect square and a number that is not a perfect square. So we have 75 is the same thing as the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. And we know that the square root of 25 is 5. So now if we put all the pieces we know together, we have, and this is I again, the square root of negative 1. So we can say that we have I times 5 times the square root of 3, and remember this is all plus or minus. And then we have a negative out in front. So combining those all together, we have 5I times the square root of 3, opposite. So now we have another example here. Solve each equation with imaginary solutions. So now we're solving for x. What we want to do is square root both sides. And now we come into play with that negative square root of 81. And we can break this up as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 81. And we know that the square root of negative 1 is I, and the square root of 81 is plus or minus 9. So now we have a little bit nicer of a number. We have x equals plus or minus 9 times I. And for our final equation here, we have 3x squared plus 75 equals 0. We're going to subtract 75 to both sides. We have 3x squared equals negative 75. Now we divide by 3. And we get that x squared is equal to negative 25. Now this is similar to the one that we just did. We can square root both sides. And we get x is equal to Well, we know that the square root of negative 25 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 25. So that's plus or minus 5i. So x equals plus or minus 5i. Alright, now for the evening I want you to try the U-try problems at the bottom of your screen here. A couple of the ones sort of like what we just did. And I also want you to write your summary.